Welcome to the DickJuge family tree. Courtesy of John Varela, he has laid this all out for us so that I can explain to you how you're related to whom. This is an overview. Next, we will go to a more in-depth study, but to start off with, my father was Alcée Frederick Juge, and he was born in 04, and my mother is Dorothy Emile Roll Juge, and she was born in 1905. And of course there's Richard. Then I'm married to Nancy Kuss. And between Nancy and Dick Juge, we had two children, Jenny and Richard. And those two have been married. Jenny was married to David, and then she was married to Bob, and is married to Bob. Richard married Beth Ann Warren in October of she was born in October of 66, but they were married February the 11th, a number of years back. At any rate, we were going to go into more depth about the Juge side, which is my father's mother was Marie Louise von der Haar, and her husband was Alcée Maurice Juge, and we'll go into more detail there. My mother is Dorothy Emile Roll, and her parents were Emile Charles Roll and Susie Amelia Werpel, and we'll study those folks also. So this is the beginning of a look at the Juge family tree. This is the DNA ancestry report, the ethnicity of Richard Alcée Juge. It has me as 1% African and 1% West Asia, and 96% European. Mostly 51% Scandinavian and 24% Iberian Peninsula and European West 15%. Scandinavia primarily located in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Also found in Great Britain, France, Germany, Netherlands, Belgium, and the Baltic states, and Finland. Scandinavians is purchased atop North Europe. Its natives referred to throughout history as Northmen, separated from the main European continent by the Baltic Sea. The Scandinavians have historically been renowned seafarers. Their adventures brought them into contact with much of the rest of Europe, sometimes as feared raiders and other times as well-traveled merchants and tradesmen. Well, my name is Richard Alcée Juge. I was born May the 7th, 1936. My entire life has been one of a great joy. In October of 1960, I married Nancy Kuss Juge. Now, Nancy had just finished her freshman year at LSU, and I had met her. I'd been in the Coast Guard, as you guys well know, and before then, I've been a New Orleanian, born in Houston, but at any rate, I had two children. Nancy and I had two children, Jenny and Richard. Jenny is the oldest. She was born in August of 61. At any rate, she married David Lester Dunn while she was in college, and he was in medical school. And later, they had a child, Sarah Dunn. And Sarah grew up, and she's now a young lady, married, and she's married to Casey Lustberg. Jenny later married Bob Monroe Kotler, and he was born in 58, she was born in 61, so he's about 3 years older than she is. And he's from Cleveland, Ohio. Now, Nancy was born in New Orleans at Touro Hospital. And Richard, being our other child, we go to that one, he was born on August 27th of 1966. If you've noticed, both of our children are born August 27th, 5 years apart. Richard later married Richard married Warren, Beth Ann Warren, when he was about 30, and I guess she was about 30, in February the 11th. I guess that would have been 96. And then they had 3 children, Charles Alcee Juge, and he was born the 17th of November, 1998. And then Max was born the 22nd of November, the year 2000. And Isabel was born 13th of March, 2002. So that is our immediate and our lineage and our descendants, our issues, so to speak. Well, we are going to look at the Alcee Frederick Juge, my father's side's relatives. My dad was born December 1st of 4 in Algiers. It was an area called McDonoughville. It was a German village on the kind of near Gretna. And in July the 5th of 1952, he died of accidental electrocution under a house on Annunciation Street, working for a cousin of his, Frank Gallagher, Iron House. He actually had a drill on his chest that he had rewound, and it shorted, and he didn't have a shirt on, and it went right through his heart and killed him. He was 47 years old at the time. I was 16. It was a devastating loss for me. I lost my buddy. He and I hunted and fished together and did all kinds of good things together. I would say I was a daddy's boy, probably. At any rate, his mother and father are, I'll say, Maurice Juge was his dad, and his mother was Marie Louise Vanderhall. The dad was born on April the 10th of 1880 in Labradorville, Louisiana, where his father was a plantation, well, actually his grandfather was a plantation manager. And he died November the 13th, 1954, my senior year in high school, my fall year. It was January the 15th of that year. I had left New Orleans and joined the Coast Guard to get the GI Bill, because the GI Bill was being faded out at the end of January due to the fact the Korean conflict was considered coming to an end. My grandmother was Marie Louise Vanderhall. She was a grand dame. They had a ton of kids. They had about 5 kids, and even lost another one in childbirth, Rodney. But she was Marie Louise Vanderhall, and she was born November 14th, 1879, in New Orleans. And she died in New Orleans, February the 8th, 1967, when she was 87 at the time. We'll talk about her side. Her father was Frank Vanderhall, and that would be my great-grandfather. He was born in 1856 and in New Orleans. Don't know about when he died, but I think we have that information somewhere. Louise Henrietta Blaze was his wife, my great-grandmother, and she was born January the 1st, 1858. And Frank Vanderhall had, maybe 7 kids. He had a bunch of gals and one son, Frank Vanderhall Jr. Louise Blaze was born in 1858 and died in 1890, so she would have been 42 years old, died a young lady. In those days, women didn't live as long. Of course, all they did was have kids and died in childbirth. Her father was Heinrich F. Blaze, and he was born in Bavaria in July of 1819, and he died in 1869, so he was about 50 years old when he died. And his wife was Catherine Rich, which would have been my great-great-grandmother. And she was born about 1805 and died in 1859. She'd have been 54. Marie, his father was Frank Vanderhall also, and he was born in January 13th, 1822, in Germany, and died in New Orleans in 1914. And Marie was his wife, Marie Elizabeth Rose Hatton Mueller, great-grandmother. great-grandmother, born July 10th, 1824 in Germany, and died in New Orleans. So you can see these are the fellows that migrated to New Orleans. And on my father's side, his father was Alcee Maurice Juge. He was Lutheran, she was Catholic. He was a Mason. But it's my understanding, as I recall as a kid, he converted to Catholicism to please my grandmother, who was a daily communicant, on his deathbed. But his father was Peter Emile Juge. Pierre Emile, Jean-Pierre, we'd hear, and his mother was Mary Bracklin. Peter Emile Juge had like 3 wives in his lifetime, and my grandfather, Alcee Maurice, came from the 3rd wife, and she was a German, and he was a Frenchman. He had an English wife one time, and he had a Cajun wife one time, and then the last wife he had was German. She was born in June of 1840 in Germany and died October of 1932 in New Orleans. Peter, my brother, was born February of 1932. One of my favorite family lore stories he gave was that he remembered his great-grandmother because she taught him a nursery rhyme, and it was a song, and he still sang it to the day he died. Peter died, of course, in 2007 or 8. So her mother and father were Carl Bracklin and Dorothy Seifert, and we don't know about their death or where they were born or where they died. And Peter Emile Juge, his father was Joseph Victor Juge, and he was born in 1801 and died in 1860. I know he immigrated to the United States in 1842, because that's when they all came over. And he had a bunch of boys, and they ran up and down the bayous. One time I was at LSU, I was renting an apartment, and the little lady that was renting it to me said, "Juge?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "My gardener's name is Juge." I said, "We're probably related." She says, I don't think so." I said, "Is he a mulatto?" She said, "Yep." I said, "No doubt we're related." And actually, Nancy and I met an old lady on her deathbed, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, which was a nun, and she was a black lady, and she had all kind of family lore. But when we got to her, she was in her senility days and just didn't know much about anything, couldn't remember anything. She was quite old. Wish I could have gotten more of a story from her. At any rate, that's the Juge end of the story for now. Well, thanks to John Varela again. He has done an extensive work on my mother's side, which happens to be his mother's side. My mother, Dorothy Emile Roll, was a twin, and her sister was Helene Roll. And they were both born on the 7th of December, 1905, in New Orleans. My mother died January the 9th, 1980. John's mother died at age 42. And we'll talk more about her later. At any rate, going up my family tree, my mother's father was Emile Charles Roll. He was born in 1882 and died June the 1st, 1924 in El Paso, Texas. You can actually go to Texas and they have obits on everybody in their database and it shows you where they were buried. He was buried in El Paso's cemetery for the non-Catholics. He married my grandmother, Susie Amelia Werpel, and she was born in 1880, and she too was older than her husband. And she was born in New Orleans, and she died June the 1st, 1959 in New Orleans. And I happened to be home that weekend when she died. She was dropped dead of a heart attack in the house in the middle of the night, and I found her on the floor. His father was Herman Roll. Now, we have pictures of him. He was banker in New Orleans. Actually, my grandfather, Emile Rolle, owned a lumberyard in New Orleans. And then he developed tuberculosis and ended up moving to El Paso for the drier climate because of tuberculosis. But his father was Herman Rolle, and he was born in 1839 and died in 1899. He was a banker. He was born in Mecklenburg-Schwerin, which is Germany, and he died in New Orleans. And his wife was Helena Henrietta Brand, and she was born October of 49. She was 10 years younger than he was, and she was born in Schweisig, Holstein, Germany, and she died the 16th of November 1926 in New Orleans. And it seems John can go back to her father was Frederick Brand. That would be my great grandfather. And he was born in 1815 and also in Schweisig, Holstein, Germany. And he died April 28th of 1881 in New Orleans. So he moved to New Orleans. Herman Rolle's father, don't have too much information on him, but Marie was his mother, great-grandmother, and she was born in 1805 and died in 1893 in New Orleans. Now we'll go over to my grandmother's side, Susie Amelia Werpel, and her dad was A.C. Werpel. He's the guy that started Lakeview. He was a cashier bank at the First Metropolitan Bank in New Orleans, which is that really ornate bank on Tchoupitoulas and Poydras, which is now run by Whitney Bank. He was born in 11th of July, 1853, in Leichenpen, Germany. And he died in September of 1923 in Grant Parish, Louisiana. I don't know what that was all about. He actually had a second wife because my grandmother's grandmother, my great-grandmother, was Josephine Allmendinger, and she was born January of 1850. There again, she was older than her husband, in New Orleans, and died in New Orleans in 1892, so she would have been 42 years old when she died. Now, her mother was Suzanne L. Anlique, and she was born February the 9th of 1812 in New York City. A lot of the Germans moved to New York area, and she died in New Orleans in 1893. And Michael George Allmendinger was her father, which would be my great-grandfather, or my great-great-grandfather. And he was born October the 23rd, 1804, in Gundelsbach, Germany. And he died November of 1864. He was 60 in New Orleans. And his father, his father's not listed, but my grandmother's mother's mother is listed, and so are her ancestors. Benjamin Leake was her father, or my great-great-grandfather, and Catherine Wilkesboro was would be my great-great-grandmother. Susie Ann Leake's mother, or Joseph Allmendinger's mother, or Susie Amelia Werpel's great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, no, grandmother, great-grandmother. All right, get back to A.C. Werpel. And he was quite a fellow. He had the New Orleans Realty Company also. I think he sold a lot of the lots in Lakeview to begin with. His father was Moritz Heinrich Werpel, and he was born in February 1801 in Bochum, Germany, and died April 11th, 1865 in St. Louis, And there's a bunch of relatives that went to St. Louis. And then his father's mother was Johanna Heinrich Werpel, great-grandfather, and his great-mother was Clara Catherine Stoffen, grandmother. So you can see there's a lot of Germans in this old family. Adele Troll was August Werpel's mother, my grandmother's grandmother, and my great-grandmother. And my great-great-grandmother was Christine Hrither, and Jean B. Troll was my great-great-grandfather. So we get the Almendinger. Did we do that? We did. And we've done our root body. So let's see. Nero, we did his mother was Helena Henrietta Brand, and she was born in October 27th of 1849. Schweitzelberg Holstein. Did we do this yet? We might have. And 16th of November 26th. So Friedrich Brand would be my great-grandfather. And my great-grandmother on Herman Roll's side, and they died in New Orleans. And the grandfather we don't know much about, but that is my direct ancestors, and your direct ancestors if you're my children and all my grandchildren. Thank you very much, Mr. Varela, for all the work you put into this. More will follow. Thank you.